The silence in the grand foyer was a living thing, thick and suffocating. My father and my stepmother stood before me, their faces masks of confusion that were rapidly melting into annoyance. They had been expecting their dutiful daughter, the one who paid for this roof over their heads, the one who funded their comfortable life without question. They were not expecting the woman who stood before them now, a stranger with ice in her eyes and a heavy file folder in her hands. I let the folder drop onto the polished mahogany table that my mother had loved so much. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel. "I know," I said, my voice eerily calm, a still lake before a tsunami. "I know everything." My father, a man who had built his life on a foundation of charm and subtle manipulation, tried to laugh it off. "Know what, sweetheart? That we were just about to pour you a glass of wine? You look stressed." His new wife, a woman whose designer clothes I paid for, chimed in with her syrupy, concerned tone. "Is everything all right at work, darling? You know you can tell us anything." The performance was so practiced, so seamless, it might have worked a week ago. But the woman they were talking to was gone, replaced by someone who had seen their true faces in the cold, hard print of their own emails. I opened the folder, revealing the top page. A signed purchase agreement for the sale of this house, my childhood home. "The closing is next Tuesday, isn't it?" I asked, my voice slicing through their act. "I imagine you were planning to tell me after the fact. After you'd moved into your new luxury condo. After you'd moved my grandmother into a state-run facility." The color drained from their faces, the carefully constructed masks crumbling to dust. They stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time, not as a source of income, but as a threat. The game was over. I let them squirm in the silence for a long moment, watching the panic flicker in their eyes. Then, I delivered the sentence I had been practicing in my mind for days, a sentence that was both an ending and a beginning. "You have 24 hours to pack your things," I said, the words clean and final. "Get out, and never come back." 3 months earlier, I was still that good daughter they believed me to be. My name is Amelia, and at 32, I was a successful architect, a fact that my father, David, took great pride in, mostly because my success directly funded his lifestyle. After my mother passed away 5 years ago, I had made a promise to her, and to myself, that I would always take care of my family and protect her legacy. That legacy was embodied by this house, a beautiful old Victorian she had poured her heart into restoring, and by her mother, my grandmother Eleanor, who still lived in the upstairs suite. When my father remarried 2 years later, to Brenda, a woman a few years my junior with expensive tastes, I simply expanded my definition of family. I paid the mortgage. I paid the property taxes, the utilities, the insurance. I gave my father a generous monthly allowance so he and Brenda could live comfortably without the stress of working. In return, all I asked was that they take care of my grandmother and preserve the home my mother cherished. It was a heavy burden, one that meant my own savings account was perpetually anemic and my social life was non-existent, but I believed it was my duty. My sacrifice was the price of being a good daughter, and I paid it without complaint. "You're a saint, Amelia," my father would often say, patting my hand over dinner. "Your mother would be so proud of you." And I would soak in those words, a balm for the exhaustion that gnawed at my bones. Brenda would nod in agreement, her diamond bracelet, a birthday gift funded by my last bonus, catching the light. "We don't know what we'd do without you," she'd murmur, and I believed them. I believed in their gratitude, in their love. I saw myself as the pillar of the family, the strong one holding everything together. I had no idea I was not the pillar, but the foundation they were planning to rip out from under the house as soon as they had gotten everything they could from me. I had built my identity around being the provider, the responsible one. It was a role I had stepped into almost immediately after my mother's death, when my father seemed so lost in his grief. I took over the family finances, managed the estate, and made sure everything continued to run smoothly. It felt like the only way I could honor my mother, by taking on her role as the family's caretaker. My work as an architect became more than a career. It was the engine that powered my promise. I took on extra projects, worked weekends, and sacrificed personal trips, telling myself it was temporary, that once my father was back on his feet, things would change. But they never did. He grew comfortable in his retirement, and with Brenda's arrival, their expenses only grew. A new car, European vacations, a complete wardrobe overhaul for Brenda. I justified each expense, telling myself that my father deserved happiness after losing his wife. I was so focused on providing for their happiness that I never stopped to consider my own. My friends would gently question my arrangement. "Don't you think you're giving them too much, Ames?" My best friend Sarah asked one evening over a rare dinner out. "You're letting them live a life you can't even afford for yourself." I defended them, of course. "It's not like that. It's the family home. It's for my grandmother. It's what my mom would have wanted." But her words planted a tiny seed of resentment, one I quickly buried under a mountain of duty. I saw my grandmother Eleanor every Sunday. She was my last living link to my mother, a witty, sharp-as-a-tack woman of 85 who saw more than she let on. She was the reason I could stomach writing those enormous checks every month. Knowing she was safe and comfortable in the home she'd shared memories in with her daughter made it all worthwhile. The cost was more than just financial. My last serious relationship had ended because my boyfriend felt he was always competing with my family's needs. "They're adults, Amelia," he'd said. "They're taking advantage of you." I called him selfish and ended it, too blind to see the truth in his words. I had unknowingly built a prison for myself, one with walls made of love and obligation, and I was both the inmate and the warden. I was so convinced I was doing the right thing, the noble thing, that I failed to see the rot that was festering right under my nose, in the very house I was working so hard to protect. The first crack in my carefully constructed reality appeared on a Tuesday. I had stopped by the house unannounced to drop off some tax documents for my father to sign. As I walked up the porch steps, I heard their voices through the open living room window, hushed and urgent. "The final appraisal came in higher than we expected," Brenda was saying, a thrill in her voice. "That's our ticket, darling," my father replied. "Freedom." I froze, my hand on the doorknob. "Appraisal? Freedom?" I pushed the door open, forcing a bright smile. "What appraisal is that?" They both jumped, their faces a perfect picture of feigned nonchalance. "Amelia, you startled us," my father said, recovering quickly. "Just some routine paperwork. The insurance company needed an updated appraisal on the house. You know how they are." Brenda nodded, her smile a little too tight. "Yes, just boring old paperwork." It sounded plausible. Plausible enough that I wanted to believe it. But I couldn't shake the words I'd heard. Freedom. What did they need freedom from? I was taking care of everything. I looked around the living room, at the new silk curtains Brenda had insisted on, at the abstract painting above the fireplace that had cost a small fortune. My money had bought all of this. I let it go, or rather, I forced myself to let it go. Questioning them felt like a betrayal of the trust I thought we shared. It was easier to accept their simple explanation than to confront the unsettling feeling in my gut. But the seed of doubt, once planted, had begun to sprout. I started paying closer attention. I noticed the travel brochures for Costa Rica on the coffee table, the whispers that would stop the moment I entered a room, the way Brenda would quickly close her laptop whenever I came near. They were hiding something, and my mind, trained to see structural flaws in buildings, began to see the cracks in my family's facade. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just tired and overworked, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was a low hum of anxiety in the back of my mind, a warning bell I was trying desperately to ignore because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that my entire life, my entire sacrifice, might be built on a lie. And that was a truth I wasn't ready to face. My weekly visit with Grandma Eleanor the following Sunday solidified my growing unease. She was sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, a book open in her lap, but her eyes were troubled. "They think I don't hear them," she said, without preamble, as I set a tray of tea and biscuits on the table beside her. "Who, Grandma?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your father and that woman. They're always having meetings. Men in suits come to the house when you're at work. They scurry around with measuring tapes and clipboards." My heart began to beat a little faster. "Dad said it was for an insurance appraisal," Eleanor snorted, a delicate, dismissive sound. "I've had insurance appraisals, my dear. They don't last for 3 hours and involve discussions about market value and closing dates." Her words landed like stones in my stomach. Closing dates. The phrase echoed the unsettling conversation I had overheard. She reached out and patted my hand, her skin as soft and thin as parchment. "I don't want to worry you, Amelia, but your mother loved this house. She would never want to see it sold." The protective instinct I felt for my grandmother was fierce and absolute. The thought of her being uprooted, of her being made to feel insecure in her own home, was unbearable. Don't worry, Grandma, I said, forcing a confidence I didn't feel. I will never let that happen. This is your home. As I drove away that evening, my grandmother's words replayed in my mind. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. Men in suits. Closing dates. My father's lies. I realized I had been willfully blind, choosing to believe in the fantasy of the happy, grateful family because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. But I could no longer ignore the evidence. For my grandmother's sake, for my mother's memory, and for my own sanity, I had to find out what was really going on. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I decided I couldn't confront them directly. They would just lie again, smooth things over with their practiced charm, and make me feel guilty for doubting them. I needed proof. I needed undeniable facts. The next day, I called my office and told them I was taking a sick day. Then I drove to my father's house, using the spare key I always carried. The house was empty, just as I'd known it would be. They always went out for lunch on Mondays. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked into my father's home office, a room that had once been my mother's study. It felt like a violation, a betrayal of the trust I had fought so hard to maintain. But I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was the one who had been betrayed. I started with the desk, going through drawers, filled with paid bills, paid by me, and bank statements. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I checked the filing cabinet. It was unlocked, and in the back of the bottom drawer, tucked away behind old tax returns, I found it. A sleek, dark blue file folder with a label that read, New Beginnings. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't insurance paperwork. It was a professionally printed real estate portfolio for luxury oceanfront condos in Costa Rica. Page after page of glossy photos depicted infinity pools, panoramic ocean views, and minimalist modern interiors. Tucked inside the portfolio was a purchase agreement for the sale of this house, my childhood home. It was signed by my father. The sale price was staggering, far more than I'd ever imagined. And the closing date was just 2 weeks away. I felt the air leave my lungs, a gasp of pure shock and pain. He was selling it. He was selling my mother's house. He was selling our memories, our history, all for an infinity pool and an ocean view. I sank into the leather office chair, the documents spread before me like the wreckage of a life I thought I knew. He was going to take the money, my money that had kept the asset afloat, and just disappear. And then I saw the other documents tucked in the back of the folder. It wasn't just about the house. It was about what they planned to do after. I found a stack of printed emails, correspondence between my father and Brenda, discussing their plans. My blood ran cold as I read their words, their casual cruelty. Amelia is being such a good little soldier, Brenda had written in one email. Her last bonus check will cover the deposit on the condo perfectly. She'll be upset about the house, of course, but she'll get over it. She always does. My father's reply was even more damning. Her sentimentality is a weakness, but it's been our perfect bridge to this new life. She's so desperate to be the good daughter she'll never see it coming. A bridge. That's all I was to them. A bridge built of my money, my time, my sacrifice. A bridge they were more than happy to burn the moment they reached the other side. But the worst was yet to come. In a separate subfolder, I found documents related to my grandmother. They had already researched elder care facilities near their new home in Costa Rica. No, not near. In a town an hour away. And they weren't the comfortable private places I would have chosen. They were low-cost, state-run nursing homes with depressing photos and a long list of negative reviews online. An email from my father to Brenda laid out their plan in sickening detail. We'll tell Amelia that Eleanor wants to be closer to us. We'll move her down there before we tell Amelia about the sale. Once she's in the system, it will be too complicated for Amelia to move her back. She'll be a burden we're finally free of. A burden. My grandmother, the heart of our family, was a burden to them. The woman who had helped raise me, who had held me when my mother died, was an inconvenience to be managed and discarded. That was the moment the grief turned to ice in my veins. The daughter they knew, the trusting, naive, good daughter, died in that office chair. In her place, something cold and methodical was born. I felt a strange and terrible clarity. I saw them for exactly who they were. Greedy, selfish parasites who had been feeding on my love and my labor. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was not going to let them win. I took out my phone and began to take pictures of every single page, every document, every signature. My hands steadied and purpose. They had made a fatal mistake. They had mistaken my kindness, and they were about to find out just how strong I could be. My first call was to Sarah, my best friend, who was also a brilliant corporate lawyer. I met her at her office an hour later, my phone filled with damning evidence. I laid out the whole story, my voice devoid of the tears I thought I would shed. I was past tears. I was in the cold, clear realm of strategy. Sarah listened, her expression shifting from shock to righteous fury. "They are monsters, Ames," she said when I finished. "Absolute monsters. But they are also incredibly stupid. They've left a paper trail a mile long," she explained my legal position. Because I had been making all the mortgage payments and paying for the upkeep of the house for years, I had a powerful claim of equitable interest. "They can't just sell it out from under you and take all the proceeds," she explained. "We can file an injunction to block the sale immediately, and we can file a suit to have you declared the primary owner, or at least force a buyout that recognizes your investment." The path forward was clear. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. "I want to do it," I said, the words tasting of iron and resolve. "I want to stop the sale, and I want them out of that house." Sarah nodded, already sketching out a plan. "First, we gather all your financial records. Every mortgage payment, every tax bill, every receipt for repairs. We need to build an airtight case that you have been the sole financial supporter of this property." Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own life. I spent hours online, downloading bank statements and canceled checks, creating a spreadsheet that detailed every dollar I had poured into that house. The total was staggering. I had invested more than twice the original down payment. I had effectively bought the house all over again, while my father and his wife lived there for free. The evidence was irrefutable. I was not just a benevolent daughter, I was the primary investor. The knowledge was both sickening and empowering. They hadn't just taken advantage of my love, they had committed, calculated, sustained financial fraud. The law was on my side. With Sarah's help, we prepared the injunction. It felt like assembling a weapon, each piece of evidence another bullet in the chamber. I was no longer acting on raw emotion. I was a general planning a campaign, and my objective was not just victory, but unconditional surrender. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from, and if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. While Sarah handled the legal artillery, my focus was on my grandmother. I couldn't risk her being caught in the crossfire. The thought of my father and Brenda trying to manipulate her, or worse, hastily moving her to one of those awful facilities, was my greatest fear. I spent a weekend researching assisted living communities near my own apartment. I found a beautiful one, with sunlit rooms, a vibrant community, and gardens that reminded me of my mother's. It was expensive, but for the first time, spending a large sum of money felt like an investment in my own peace of mind, not a sacrifice for someone else's comfort. I visited the facility, met with the director, and put down a deposit on a lovely one-bedroom apartment with a view of the rose garden. The following Sunday, I went to see Eleanor. I told her a carefully constructed version of the truth. "Grandma, I've been thinking. You're so far away from me out here. I found a wonderful new apartment for you, just a few minutes from my place. It's bright and sunny, and you wouldn't have to deal with the stairs anymore." She looked at me, her eyes sharp and knowing. "And what about your father and Brenda?" she asked. "They'll be fine. It's time for me to have you closer to me," I said, meeting her gaze. I think she knew there was more to the story, but she trusted me. She saw the new strength in my eyes and didn't question it. "If you think it's for the best, my dear, then it's for the best," she said, squeezing my hand. The relief was overwhelming. Over the next week, while my father and Brenda were out, I began a covert operation, moving Eleanor's most cherished belongings, her photos, her favorite books, the small rocking chair my grandfather had made for her, into a storage unit near the new apartment. I was disentangling her from that house, from their lives, piece by piece, ensuring that when the bomb finally dropped, she would be well clear of the blast radius. It was the hardest week of my life. I had to maintain the illusion of the dutiful daughter while orchestrating the complete demolition of my father's world. I spoke to him on the phone, my voice cheerful and normal, while Sarah was filing the injunction that would shatter his plans. I visited the house for dinner, complimenting Brenda on the meal, knowing that in a few days she would be packing her bags. They were completely oblivious, wrapped up in their cocoon of greed and arrogance. Their conversations were filled with veiled references to their future. They talked about finally getting some sun and downsizing. They were so close to their prize they could taste it. Their kindness towards me was sickeningly amplified. They were fattening the calf before the slaughter, trying to ensure I would be compliant and manageable when they finally broke the news. "You've been working so hard, Amelia," my father said during that last dinner, his voice oozing with false concern. "Once things settle down, you need to take a real vacation for yourself." I just smiled, a tight, secret smile, thinking, "Oh, don't worry, I will." I felt like an actor in a play, and only I knew the final act. The tension was almost unbearable, but the thought of their faces when they finally realized the truth was the fuel that kept me going. They thought they were in control. They thought I was a pawn in their game. They had no idea that I had already checkmated them. The day of the confrontation arrived. Sarah called me that morning. "It's done," she said. "The injunction has been served on the real estate agent and the title company. The sale is frozen. The house is locked down." The final piece was in place. I had already arranged for movers to take the last of my grandmother's things that afternoon. I drove to the house, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my life and honoring my mother's memory in the truest way possible, by protecting her mother and refusing to let her legacy be sold for a condo in Costa Rica. I walked through the front door into the grand foyer, the stage for my final performance. They greeted me with warm smiles, the predators welcoming their prey, completely unaware that the tables had irrevocably turned. And I let the folder drop. We were back where we started, in the suffocating silence of the grand foyer. My accusation hung in the air between us, undeniable and devastating. "The condo, the nursing home for Grandma. How could you know?" my father stammered, his face ashen. He looked at Brenda, a silent, panicked question in his eyes. "I know because you wrote it all down," I said, my voice as cold and hard as marble. I slid the copied emails across the table. "Your own words. Her sentimentality is a weakness, a burden we're finally free of. Does that sound familiar?" Brenda let out a sob, a theatrical, self-pitying sound that held no genuine remorse. "We were going to tell you," she cried. "We were just waiting for the right time." "The right time?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You mean after the sale closed? After you had my money and my grandmother was locked away in some hellhole? There is no right time for that level of betrayal." My father tried to regain control, to fall back on the paternal authority he thought he still possessed. "Now, Amelia, you're being hysterical. We were doing this for everyone's good. The house is too much to maintain." "I maintained it," I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. "For 5 years, I have paid for everything. This roof, those curtains, the food on your table. You weren't maintaining a house. You were living in a resort funded by your sentimental daughter." Their attempts to gaslight me were pathetic. They tried to claim the emails were misinterpreted, that their plans were just ideas they were exploring, that they always had my and Eleanor's best interests at heart. But the evidence was too stark, their lies too transparent. They had been caught, and like cornered rats, they were becoming desperate. "So what are you going to do?" my father asked, a sneer creeping into his voice as his fear turned to anger. "Run and cry to your friends? You can't stop this." That was my cue. I looked him dead in the eye, savoring the moment. "It's already stopped. As of 10 a.m. this morning, a court-ordered injunction is in place. The sale is frozen. The house cannot be sold, transferred, or used as collateral for any loan." The color vanished from his face. Brenda stared at me, her mouth hanging open. "You can't do that," she whispered. "I can, and I have," I replied. "And that's not all. I'm filing a lawsuit to claim full ownership of this house based on equitable interest. My lawyer seems to think we have an excellent case, given that I have proof of paying 100% of its expenses for the last 60 months. I let that sink in. The house, their golden ticket, was not only out of reach, it was about to be ripped from their grasp entirely. "And as for Grandma," I continued, the final blow. "Her things were moved out this afternoon. She's settling into her new apartment, just 10 minutes from me. She's safe, she's comfortable. And you will never see her again." The silence that followed was absolute. They had nothing left. No lies, no manipulations, no escape route. They had lost everything because they had fundamentally misunderstood the person they were dealing with. They saw a doormat, but they had awakened a dragon. I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. I walked to the door, then turned back to look at them one last time. They looked small and pathetic, stripped of their power and their arrogance. I meant what I said. You have 24 hours. And then I walked out, closing the door on my past and stepping into my future. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional recalibration. My father, true to form, tried to fight. He hired a lawyer and made counterclaims, accusing me of emotional distress and attempting to steal his property. But the evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. The judge took one look at the financial records and the emails and practically laughed my father's case out of court. Brenda left him within a month, once it became clear the money was gone and there would be no luxury condo in Costa Rica. I heard she moved back in with her parents. My father was forced to move into a small rental apartment, a stunning downgrade from the life he had been living. I spent my weekends with my grandmother, helping her decorate her new apartment and watching her blossom away from the toxic environment of her old home. She was happier than I had seen her in years, making new friends and joining a book club. "You saved me, Amelia," she told me one afternoon as we sat on her sunny balcony. "No, Grandma," I replied, taking her hand. "We saved each other." The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, almost 2 months after I had kicked them out. I was at my desk, reviewing blueprints for a new project, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Amelia?" It was my father's voice, but it was different. The charm was gone, replaced by a whining, aggrieved tone. "Yes? I just wanted to let you know, the mortgage payment bounced. The bank called me, and I haven't received my allowance for this month. I was just wondering why you stopped paying." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the question left me speechless for a full 10 seconds. He had been exposed as a thief and a liar, had been kicked out of his home, and he was still expecting me to pay his bills. The delusion was breathtaking. I took a slow, calming breath, refusing to give him the angry reaction he likely wanted. "David," I said, using his first name for the first time in my life, "our financial arrangement is over. The house is no longer your concern, and neither are your expenses. If you have any further questions, you can direct them to my lawyer." I hung up before he could respond, then blocked his number. I stared at the phone, and then, for the first time in months, I started to laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated freedom. The last chain had been broken. He still didn't get it. He still saw me as an obligation, a walking ATM, but he was no longer my problem. He was just a man on the phone, a ghost from a life I had left behind. 1 year later, life was unrecognizably beautiful. The court case settled decisively in my favor. I was granted full ownership of the house. After much thought, I decided to sell it. The memories were too tainted, the energy too fraught. I sold it to a young family who promised to fill its rooms with laughter, and I used the proceeds to buy a chic, modern townhouse for myself and to set up a trust fund that would ensure my grandmother's every need was met for the rest of her life. My career flourished. Freed from the constant financial and emotional drain, my creativity soared. I was promoted to partner at my firm, and I finally took that vacation my father had so condescendingly suggested. A 2-week solo trip to Italy where I ate pasta, drank wine, and rediscovered the woman I was when I wasn't just the good daughter. I learned that my value was not determined by my sacrifices for others, but by the respect I had for myself. My father occasionally tried to reach out through relatives, spinning tales of a cruel, ungrateful daughter who had abandoned him in his time of need. But the truth had a way of seeping out, and very few people were buying his story. I learned to live with the fact that I had lost a father, but I had gained myself. One sunny afternoon, I was sitting with Eleanor in the gardens of her residence. She was telling me about her new boyfriend from her watercolor class. I looked at her, her face animated and happy, and I knew I had made the right choice. I had honored my mother not by blindly clinging to a building, but by protecting the person she loved most. "You know," Eleanor said, looking at me with her wise eyes, "your mother was strong, just like you, but she always worried you were too kind for your own good." "Maybe I was," I said, smiling. But I learned. The world no longer saw me as just the good daughter. I was a partner at a prestigious firm, a homeowner, a world traveler. But most importantly, I saw myself as something new. I was a woman who had walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged, not burned, but forged. And that was a legacy worth more than any house.